So, have you heard that before? Does that sound familiar? I told you so. Now, if we've probably heard that, chances are it's in a negative, right? Maybe somebody has told us something was going to happen, and we're like, nah, I'm sorry, I don't believe you. And then it happens, and then we get those words, I told you so. So we look at that, and is there a way that we could turn it into a positive? Well, what if, I'll give you an example, what if God was to make a promise to one of his servants, and he comes through with that promise, and he says, I told you so. I told you I would do that for you. Now we could appreciate those words, right? But he actually did that to one of his faithful servants. One of his faithful servants named Noah. He told Noah that he was going to get rid of all wickedness throughout the land. Now, if we look to the Bible as our authority, we do see in the Bible that there's many details about how that flood took place. It's interesting to note that Jesus himself in the Bible recalls seeing that flood actually take place. But what if I was to get this Bible and say, okay, that's fine, there is evidence in the Bible, but is there evidence here on earth today that that flood actually took place? And the answer is, there is. You see, when I was doing this research, I found this actually very interesting, that here in the northwestern United States, they have found over 100 catastrophic flood events that have taken place. Actually, one of those floods, they believe the waters to be about 2,000 feet high, just at the evidence that they've seen. And that's not including fossil evidence. See, it's interesting too that near Palmero, Sicily, there was a cave with remains of various animals. In that cave, they found deer, they found hippopotamus, they found elephants. Now we kind of look at that area and say, wow, things may have been a whole lot different than we see them today, right? And in South England, it's even more fascinating, because there they found many of the same animals, but now you can add to the list hyena and polar bear. You're thinking, how are these animals in the same spot? Well, scientists go on to believe that something must have washed them away. Had all these animals washed away, and now they ended up in this spot here. Now we go on to the fact that there's many flood legends throughout the earth. The International Bible Encyclopedia tells us, as far as flood legends, that throughout the nations, and we're talking worldwide, most of these nations, and even let's get a little bit smaller, the tribes all around the world, all have some sort of flood legend that ties in, that somehow their ancestors were wiped away. So we gotta ask ourselves, is that some kind of coincidence that all these things are coming together? And the answer to that is no, it's not a coincidence. But even if that were true, even if the Bible says that there is a flood, what does that have to do with you? What does it have to do with me? What do I care if there was a flood years ago? That has nothing to do with me, right? Well, let's see if it does. Why don't we go to the Bible? Let's see Jesus' words in Matthew 24:37. That's the book of Matthew 24, verse 37. If you have it, it reads, "For just as the days of Noah were, so the presence of the Son of Man will be." The day that we saw there sets a pattern for the day that we're living in now. So we can ask ourselves, okay, well, how does that actually tie in? How does that make sense, right? Well, in order for that actually to make sense, we would have to know what actually took place in the days of Noah, and maybe even compare it to the days that we're living in now. So why don't we go ahead and do that? Why don't we look at the days of Noah first? Let's take the demonic influence, for example. The demons had a huge influence in Noah's day. But how? How did that come about? Why would they have any influence at all? Let's go back to the Bible and see how this all came to be. if you would follow me to the book of Genesis 6, and we're going to read verse 2 now, and see how these demons came to be on earth. Genesis 6, verse 2 says, "The sons of the true God began to notice that the daughters of men were beautiful, so they began taking as wives all whom they chose." Now, we look at this verse and notice that the sons of the true God, what are they talking about? The angels. The angels were looking down to earth, and they were noticing mankind, which wasn't a big deal, right? I'm sure they were used to looking down on earth and seeing mankind. But the issue was, they started to notice the women in an unnatural way. Now, did they start to dismiss those thoughts and say, you know what, that's unnatural for me to look at a woman in that way? It's Jehovah I must serve. No. It says they left their position in heaven and they came and started to marry. They came and started basically to multiply with these women. And what was the result? Well, their offspring. Their offspring were these giants. And we could just imagine this. A giant, probably about an inch or two taller than I am. But yes, these giants, big, strong, and they were violent people. Now, so big and so violent and so, prominent were these men that people started to look up to them. They were men of fame, as the Bible calls them. But that even went to regular men. They wanted to be like these Nephilim, as they were called. So much so that they even impacted the children. Children became bullies. Violence started to spread throughout the land. So we ask ourselves, now, where was Noah in all this? What was he doing? Well, Noah was busy raising 3 little boys himself. Now we ask ourselves, well, if that affected the kids in that time, how did it affect Noah's boys? How would it affect you raising children? Was his kids, were they shielded completely from the stories that they heard about the Nephilim? From what they saw of the Nephilim? No. And chances are people, again, they wanted to be like them because they got what they wanted. They were bullies. They were able to do whatever they wanted. Now, would that influence them? Now, let me ask you a question. You raising, now going to our day, you raising children in this world, how are you able to do it? Now, the world that we live in is disgusting, filled with also demonic influence. We turn on the TV today, trying to find some decent entertainment, and this world is filled with spiritism. It's filled with magic. It's filled with things to entice our children and grab them in this demonic world. So let me ask you this. How did Noah do it? And how are you doing it to raise children and have success? It's only with Jehovah's backing that we're able to do that, right? So, although we know Noah was a fantastic father, he was a fantastic husband, he was a busy man, right? Because Jehovah now, he gave him the task of building an ark. It took about 40 years to build that ark. But what if I told you that probably wasn't his biggest task, his hardest task? See, if we remember, Noah was also a preacher. And what we just talked about, such an ungodly world, such a violent world, such a corrupt world, how was he able to go out and preach to these people? Well, if you think about it, he probably had a lot of success, right? Because these people probably wanted to hear the good news. Let's go to the Bible to find out if that's true. Let's go to the book of Matthew 24, 38 and 39. Matthew 24, 38 and 39. And again, this is Jesus talking. This was another eyewitness account, and this one's just a little bit more in detail. It says, "For as they were in those days before the flood, eating and drinking, men marrying, and women being given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered the ark." We'll read 39 as well. "And they took no note until the flood came and swept them all away, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. So according to what we just read, did Noah have any success in his preaching work? No, he didn't. Nobody wanted to listen. Why? What was the issue? Well, it says men and women, they were eating, they were drinking. Now, what's wrong with eating and drinking? We need to do that to survive, right? But they were also marrying. What's wrong with marrying? Jehovah established marriage. He wants us to live a happy life, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But the point is, they were busy in their lives. They were busy doing what they wanted to do. They were taking no note of all the signs that were going on around them, even though Noah was giving them clear warning. That was the issue. So let me ask you this now. Being that Noah was a preacher in that time, and the fact, too, I didn't touch on the fact that they ridiculed him. They did not just listen, they ridiculed him. They laughed at him. It could be even so that they were violent against him. Now, can you imagine being Noah, and you and your family are getting ready to work on the ark? Oh yeah, yesterday was a good day, put in a long day on the ark, today's even going to be better, we have our material ready. And you go and the ark is sabotaged. All the work that you did maybe the day before is taken down. My material is gone. Where did my stuff go? People had hatred for Noah and his family for the message that they were spreading. How did he do it? How did he continue? Why would he continue? Now let me ask you this. Why do you continue? Let's flip it to our day. Now we look at our day and we preach as well. We go door to door. Does everybody want to listen? It would be nice, but no. Sometimes we get some doors slammed in our faces, right? Sometimes we're laughed at for being one of Jehovah's Witnesses. Sometimes we're ridiculed. Maybe not so much in this country, but in other countries, our brothers and sisters are being violently attacked. Now, how about the fact that we work hard on our kingdom halls? We work hard on our assembly halls. We learn about Russia. They're taking all that away from us. So why is it that you keep going? And why are you able to still do it with a smile? Is it because we have Jehovah's backing, right? And we look into also another sick thing that goes on in our days is the sexual practices that are now coming to light. Before, pornography, you would have to go and you would have to look for it, maybe look at it in privacy of your home. But now we have tablets, we have phones. You can get it all at a push of a button. And what about sex before marriage? That's something of the norm, right? And something that's huge right now, and is now being more and more common and brought to light, is homosexuality. We're seeing that trying to become the norm in our day, right? Now we go back to the days of Noah. We talked about the Nephilim, and we talked about how they came to be. So we could just imagine the sick practices that the angels that came, or now demons, that turned their back on Jehovah, came and were practicing unnatural sexual relations with the women here on earth. Sick world that Noah lived in and that we live in today. And that's not to mention the violence that we see, right? You know, it's kind of sad. I making breakfast, and I wasn't used to watching the news, but I would make breakfast for my girls once in a while, and I would turn on the news, and being that I wasn't used to watching it, I wasn't used to hearing about things that would happen. But it was kind of depressing, you know, being the fact that you would hear about these violent attacks, and not only that, it's always the worst in history. Everything that happens is always the worst in history. The massacres that are taking place, the violent shootings, the rampages that people are going on. You know, they say, wow, this has been the worst in history, the worst in U.S. history. And it's kind of depressing. And we already touched on the fact that how violent Noah's day was. So how is it that we continue? Is Jehovah just going to keep his arms crossed and let all this take place for us? Should this actually surprise us.